Hello everyone, Michael Jacobs. I'd like to welcome you to the Jacobs 3D Golf Show. It's December 2016. This was a fast year. It was a really good year. We had some great things happen. A book, Elements of the Swing, came out. Hope everybody enjoyed it. It was written in a way that would introduce you, that's why it's called the Fundamental Edition, to some of the subjects that we're going to be talking about and sharing over the next 5 to 10 years. And when I look at some of the feedback, a couple people said, well, it didn't really tell me what to do with my own swing. I don't think that was the point of the book. I think the point of the book was to introduce you to some new terminology, to allow you to see what is really happening in a golf swing and understand some basic definitions and some things that I don't think the golf industry has ever seen before, at least not from a golf professional in a typical book and lesson setting. Also, what it did was it let you, for the first 3 to 4 chapters, read comfortably some of the new ideas, and then for those that wanted to go on further in chapter 5, we put all kinds of data in there and some swings so that you could go back and forth, look at the swing, look at some of the things that we use to describe the swing in our software program, and then you can go back and forth and come up with some great ideas. So that was the way the book was laid out. We also released a video this year. It was the fundamental video that goes along with the book, where we took a discussion between a golf professional, myself, and an engineer who has done golf research for a really long time. He's the best at it, Dr. Stephen Nesbitt. So that video introduces you to a lot of these topics as well. It's not so much that you say, we're not telling you at the moment how to change your golf swing or what you should do. It's core principles that should help your golf game by knowing them and your overall knowledge of the swing. It's, you know, who is this for? It will be for everybody, but I think it takes a real good golf enthusiast to really want to sort through this and enjoy, you know, something you've never seen before. One of the interesting things that Dr. Steve brought up in the video and we discussed in the book is the basic characteristics of a golf club and how the golfer moves them. So in this show, the release show, Release 2, I want to get into a couple things we haven't really talked about yet. You go back to 2011 or 2010, I believe, the first release show, and you watch that, and it was the discussion of allowing the club to move out into the ball, and when should that take place? Should that happen automatically? Should a golfer manually move the club out? Things like lag and all things that have been talked about in golf, we scratched the surface of in the release video back then. And you could see when you watch that, you see a radar machine in the background. You see the infancy of the technology we had to produce this. Now, the analysis was the same. The theory was the same. It goes back for a long time. But now we have some of the tools to be able to fine-tune this for you. So let's get into the Release 2 show. Happy holidays to everybody out there, and I'm sure 2017 will be an even better year. Removing simplifications. When you're trying to figure out or describe what actually happened in a sports performance move and things, the attempts to try to describe what's happened usually has some type of simplifications built in to help try to get as close as you can to an answer. So we're really interested in golf. We're golf nerds, and I wanted to set out to make sure that there were no simplifications, that we knew exactly what was happening. And that's what the work of Dr. Stephen Nesbitt was. So that's why it was a good fit for us. Things like a 2-pendulum model, or reducing it to a pendulum, or reducing it to a single plane, those types of simplifications were used for a long time, and they removed a lot of what we feel is important in a swing, like a circular hub path, things we described in the book. If you're watching this video, chances are you thumbed through the book or you've seen some of the other stuff. One other simplification of interest is the resistance of the club to it twisting. And when you factor that in, so let's talk about that briefly, because that seems to be a big hot topic. If you had a club, and let's just say we had a club moving around, and the thing is twisting or rotating. If it's rotating right around its own center of mass, let's say, which is the balance point right here, if it's rotating around that point, by rotating, I mean this type of movement, then its resistance to twisting is very low. So if you put this thing in some type of, they call it moment of inertia, some type of moment of inertia system, and then calculated or measured its resistance to twisting at the actual balance point, it would be low. It would be the lowest possible. And then as you move out away from that point, and then you tested what it would be like to twist it, let's say at this point, it would start to increase in resistance. And if you just grabbed the club and you grabbed it all the way on the end here and you twisted it like this, you could see it's much harder than if you did it over here and you just let it twist. You could see how easy it is to rotate around its own mass center. Okay? So at the balance point, at the mass center, it's the least resistant to twisting. If it's rotating around its own mass center like this, things like twisting it or torquing it would be, the club would respond heavily to that. As you start to move out, and if this thing is actually rotating in a way, let's say something like this, where it's rotating around is actually up here, if you measured out that far, it would be really hard to twist, almost like a really long thing to try to move. So the further the distance it gets from there, the more rotational resistance it has, the less responsive it is to your twisting on it and things of that nature. So what's been done in golf and baseball is they say, okay, to simplify things and figuring out what's happening in a swing, they measure the distance from here to the grip where it's held. They calculate the resistance at that point, and then that's it. The resistance is left alone. So it's a set resistance from the distance here to the midpoint of the hands, and that's what's used to try to figure out what the golfer is doing, how the club is going to respond to how it's forced and how it's twisted. So the rotational resistance, the response to your ability to try to torque it, is based on that static measurement between the center, the balance point, the center mass, and the hands. So regardless of how the club is actually moving or how it's actually rotating, that is the static resistance set, and everything is based around that. In our system, that is called I static. So I static is a static measurement of that point. But we know that when a golf club is moving, it is not necessarily in that state to where it's rotating around that point, so the resistance is not this the whole entire swing. So what if you could actually know, and you took a club and you have its movement through the swing, and let's say for the start of the downswing, the golfer is moving it like this, like you see in a lot of high-end players, and the thing is rotating right around its own center of mass, let's say. So let's say you took your club, and instead of doing the analysis from the grip to that center of mass and getting that static measurement, you did also the measurement at its own mass center. So you did a measurement here, you put it in a similar type thing, and you got that actual measurement. You would get a very small resistance, much smaller than here. Now, as the golf club's moving, could you imagine if you knew throughout the whole entire swing exactly where that club was rotating around and what that actual resistance is at every instantaneous point of the swing? So basically what you're doing then is you're putting what the golfer is doing and how the club is going to respond to the twisting and the forcing. The angular response is going to be then truly what's happening. That how the club is rotating throughout the swing, and that rotational resistance at that instant in time will really tell you exactly what's happening in the swing. So I dynamic, or what I like to call I actual, is the true rotational resistance of that club at that instant in time. I static, there are times when the club will rotate around that I static point, that same point that was measured, but it's not very often in a swing. It's usually when you have a good player, the club's rotating pretty much right around here, and then at this point, when the club starts to move out a little and it lines up with the hands a little more, that's the point where I actual and I static will kind of line up. And then once it moves out and beyond, it goes above. The club is rotating above I static, and now it gets less responsive to how you're twisting. Why is this important? Well, if you just pick I static and leave it and assume that the rotational resistance is the same the whole swing, then the way that the club changes its angular movement would just be purely changing in torques. If you use I actual and you have the instantaneous resistance at all moments in time, you will start to truly get what the golfer is doing. And that's why the hundreds and hundreds of golfers who have come over the past 2.5 years have been analyzed, all have said the same exact thing. They all have said, that's exactly what it feels like I'm doing. Let me expand. If I started my downswing, let's say, I started my downswing, and then I got to this point right here, let's say, in an I static thing where it was static, just in that basic, simple way of figuring out the resistance of the club, you would have everybody would have to positively torque it here to get the angular motion going. And then once the club got on this side, it would immediately then show that the golfer is trying to reverse it. So it would be put it all in early, and then when that club came out this way, they'd be trying to reverse it as they pulled the club around, because as you're pulling it, the club's responding to that pull, and they would be trying to reverse it. So there would be a lot of positive torquing and a lot of negative torquing, almost like if you were coming down like a check swing in a baseball. And I think every golfer out there knows that's not what's happening. I think every golfer knows they pull early in the swing, right? And they don't feel much of that angular because the club is rotating around its own balance point. So by knowing I actual, you get a better indication of what the golfer is doing. So they will have very little to no torque early on in the downswing. Now that's depending on the angle you're looking at. One of the things you saw in the book, that in iron play, you'll see a lot of golfers apply a lot of positive beta torque at the end of the backswing, which helps create the reversal. So when we're talking about alpha, that was a popular conversation, that's just in the plane of the swing. You could also have beta, which is off plane, which happens a lot of times in iron swings. So it's not just the alpha. So if you're really looking at analysis, you need alpha, beta, and gamma, because it's, the motion of the body matters. So back to what I was saying. So what most golfers feel is they definitely feel a very low resistance to the club. And there's an advantage to moving your hub path and moving your swing to keeping that club rotating around its own balance point for a long time in the downswing. And that's how lag is created. We're going to get into that when we talk lag shortly. So that start down, in an I actual situation, there would be very little torque. You could even do some negative torque as you bring the club closer to you, and you've seen that in all players. And I think that's what every golfer feels like they're doing, because we're in an eye actual situation. And then at this point, when the club starts to move out, you don't feel like you're starting to negatively torque it or trying to check swing it. You feel like at this point, you're still trying to do what you're doing. Hogan, Tommy Armour wishing they had 3 right hands. Phil Mickelson, Vijay Singh, that right hand moving like this. I think everybody feels like they're doing that. But what happens is, because the club moves out, eye actual starts to grow. And it starts to move out towards the hands and then above the hands. So the rotational resistance of the club starts to rapidly grow. And that's what changes the angular acceleration, not you trying to reverse torque it as you come down. And that's when the great alpha war came about. We were saying eye actual, describing it this way, that when the club moves out, the rotational resistance makes it less respondent to how you're talking. And the other side of the alpha war was saying that they were using a static measurement and then saying a lot early and then stop it late. And I don't think golfers feel like they're doing that. Just think about if a golfer gets to the top of their swing, let's say they get to parallel, and the club's rotating right around its own mass center right there, its own balance point. Rotational resistance will be the lowest possible. So if I torqued it, the thing would really go. So just think about the advantage of having it rotate around its mass center for a good portion of the early downswing. What would be the benefits of that? Number one, rotational resistance would be the lowest. What that means is the body can start to do things faster. So when rotational resistance is low and the club is close to me, things like rotational power coming from differentiation at the hip joint, things like that can start to be utilized by the golfer and transferred out to the club later. If I'm in a situation, if I'm in a situation where, let's say, at the top of the swing, the club is out here more, or early on in the downswing, I've casted it out and the club is way out here, the rotational resistance is much higher. So that club is going to start to slow me down. It's taking energy out from me earlier than it would be in somebody who's so-called lagging the club down. So golf, one of the things that bothered me throughout my whole entire career was figuring out somebody who looked like Sergio versus somebody who looked like David Toms, and why can't that golfer do the same things as the other golfer, is because of the way they're managing the eye actual. That's really the mechanical meaning. So if you can find ways to keep the club rotating around its own mass center early in the downswing, you're going to be able to do the things with your body that you want to do. Now, here's where it gets interesting. If you are in that situation and you could then transfer out the energy to the club later, or at the time when most great players do it, you're going to have totally different body locations, metrics, things that you've done with your body, different than somebody who, let's say, has the club out this way and has more rotational resistance early on. They're going to do something completely different. And I think where, we were having this conversation the other day in the city. I was with a couple of really good golf pros, and we were having a conversation about, has golf teaching gotten better? Has the golfer gotten better? Well, I think the golfer and the golf teacher have gotten better at seeing things and being able to see the differences, but they don't understand yet how it was done and how to mix and match the kinetics to what they see in the kinematics. And I think that's why I'm so excited about our program, because over the past 7 years, what I've been able to do with Dr. Steve is finally bridge that gap. So you are going to see in my master book and my master program that comes out, you're going to see I think for the first time, matching components together, and I got to give credit to the golfing machine and Homer Kelly for back in the day. I mean, probably in the 60s and 70s, he did the best he could. He would probably love this stuff, but he was one of the first people to put together a little catalog of components that you could take, a standard foot action and put it together with standard hip action. You had a catalog of things to move around. But I think for the first time, we're going to be able to put together a catalog based on the kinetics. So what I mean by that is, if you're somebody with eye actual being, let's say, a certain amount at the top of your swing versus somebody with eye actual a different amount, you're going to be able to do different things with your body. And that's the kind of analysis that we're going to do when we apply all this in this year coming up.